Well, we have been in a series now for a bunch of weeks called Love Your Neighbor. And this one has been all about really looking at the reality that God has loved us and he has chosen to move towards us, even though we failed him. And we look at that reality that God has said, hey, I'm going to love you. And it's because of that love that we then go love our neighbors, right? We said that we love because he first loved us. We looked at that verse over and over and over the last several weeks. And we said that that's the driver of loving our neighbors. It's not because we're trying to be good people. It's not because we're trying to earn salvation. None of that. The deep underlying motivation is this unrelenting reality that Jesus came to the planet on purpose, that he died an innocent death and rose from the dead for me and for you, and that he now offers us life. When we don't deserve it, we couldn't earn it, and that reality of the gospel and the love of God is what is going to move us and motivate us in powerful ways. And one of the things we've been talking about over the last bunch of weeks, if you want to catch up online later, you can on our YouTube channel if you want to check that out. We've been talking about the reality that we love our neighbors, and some of those neighbors live in our home. They're kind of our first neighbors, right? If you have a roommate or you've got kids or live with your parents still, those are kind of your first neighbors. And what we want to do today is talk a little bit about how do we love our first neighbors. Specifically, we want to look at it a little bit through the dad lens, the parental lens, and see how that love might show up in the life of my children if I'm a dad, loving and investing in those first neighbors. And before you check out, right, if you're not a dad, just know that this will apply to all of us, right? If you want to be a dad one day, if you have a dad, if you want to have some level of influence on another human being one day, maybe this applies to you, right? Because really what we're going to talk about is influence. How does influence work, and how does love and caring for and investing into someone else look? Specifically, we're looking at the father lens, but you're going to be able to take pieces kind of no matter where you are, right? And specifically, as we look at that role, we're going to stare at the role of God being a father to us, and that's going to inform how we might be a parent or a person of influence to somebody else. And Paul actually tells us to do this in Ephesians chapter 5. He says this: follow God's example. Follow God's example. Look to the Father. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us. So Paul's going to say, hey, you have this perfect example in God the Father, and just like children that imitate and mimic and stare at their dads and kind of do whatever they do, you should be that way towards God. And specifically, we want to do that in our relationship with our kids. Man, what does it mean to be a dad? And I remember, like, I'm an only child, and I grew up. I had an amazing stepdad came into my life when I was about 10 years old, and I learned so much from him, right? But before that, there was a lot of breakage and not a lot of presence of a man that I could trust and follow. And so when I went to go be a dad, I'm like, I kind of know what to do with a 10-year-old. What do you do with this baby, right? Like, how does this whole thing work? And how does one do this? And a bunch of us in the room feel that way. A bunch of us show up and we enter into fatherhood, and we're like, I don't really have the example that I wish I had. I might have learned a few things of what not to do. Some of us had dads that were just completely absent from our lives. And so we enter into parenting and fathering from a bit of a lack and a question mark of how is this thing supposed to look? And here's one of the best things I think we can say is, if I'm going to try to understand what it means to be a good dad, if I invested some time and energy somewhere, it would be this: to simply stare at who God the Father is and what he's like and what he does. What's his heart like? How does he function, right? What are his passions like? How does he show up, and how does he love me? And those are the questions that I really began to ask as a new dad. Is I'm like, what's kind of the job description for being a dad, right? This thing is loaded. How do you do it, right? And I think we all probably wonder that sometimes, like, what am I supposed to be doing as a dad? Is my whole role here just to kind of walk around and turn off lights? I feel like that sometimes. Just follow children around and you go, right? That might shut the door that he sees on, right? Is that my whole job is to kind of just be logistical and to try to minimize expenses and, try not to step on Legos in the middle of the night, all that stuff, right? There's more than that. There's some deep underlying actions that really show up and are attached to the role of being a dad, right? And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a few of those to frame our conversation here. First, I want to look at a verse, and then what we're going to do is walk through 7 S verbs. I felt a little cheesy on Father's Day, so we're going back to that, right? So if you're taking notes, get your little notes app out, dads especially or whoever, and you can jot all these 7 words down and take a quick scan later and be like, hey, am I in the ballpark? But here's kind of the framework of what we want to ask. Paul says this later in Ephesians. He says, fathers, don't exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So these 7 words are going to fall within the ballpark of kind of what it looks like to bring our kids up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. What we don't want to do is exasperate. What we're not trying to do is cause our kids to fail or push them in ways that are going to cause them to run away from us and away from the Lord. We want to help them be drawn to the Lord and drawn to health. Okay, so here's our 7 words. You guys ready? 7 kind of action words that we can dive into, 7 things that we might be doing if we are fathering. And probably many of them are going to apply to a lot of different relationships where there's influence attached. Okay, here's number 1. Let's jump in. First one is this: staying. Simply showing up and not quitting is a massive win. It's a massive win. And it's not a given, right? It's not a given. And probably that's why it got a little quiet in here when we even said the word. Many of us grew up in homes where dad didn't stay. Some of us are maybe dads that didn't stay. How do I recognize and reconcile what this looks like? That the reality is simply going and showing up in the life of my kids. Whether that's physically in a home or if there's complexity, staying involved in their lives, if that's a possibility. Here's the heartbeat of God the Father. Deuteronomy says, he will never leave you or forsake you. This is what God is like. He's a dad that never leaves. He never forsakes. He never runs out of patience. He stays in it even when we fail, even when it's really hard and complicated, right? This is how God is. And when we as dads look at the responsibility of fatherhood and say, man, what I'm going to do is I'm going to eliminate the possibility as far as it depends on me, and I realize it doesn't always depend on us. As far as it depends on me, I'm going to make the decision to say I am going to stay. I'm going to anchor myself here, and I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to allow the option to be on the table of quitting, of throwing in the towel if I have something to say about it. If it's within the kind of the realm of biblical marriage, right? I want to stay in the marriage if at all possible. And then for sure, I want to stay in the life of my kids. Hear me. I just want to speak to you real quick if you haven't done that. Just real quick. If you haven't stayed, listen, please. It's not too late to take action. It's not. Has damage been done? Probably. Does that mean that you can't go back and say, I'm sorry, I wish I would have, if I could go back, please forgive, and regularly show up on their terms, not yours, on their terms? Massive healing can happen simply by one big act of courage to eat it and say, I'm going to go and show up and be here, even though it's been 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. It's not too late. Those of you who are feeling it in fatherhood, man, sometimes we all feel it. You get your breaking point, you're like, I don't know. Whew. This is a lot. I just want to go play softball, whatever. But whatever you're right? You're feeling it, the pressure of it, the consistency of it, the sacrifice of it. To stay is a massive statement of love for children. Massive. Here's the next one. Staying, I want to be a stabilizing force in my family. Every family runs into major turbulence. Just the reality of kind of what life brings, right? The highs and lows and ups and downs and bad news and disappointments. And somebody has to be in the thick of that and try to bring some stability to this thing. So to not let the family do this, but kind of take it down a notch and keep it steady. God would say this, right? So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. This is the heart of God the Father. He's like, hey, I'm here. It's okay. Don't be afraid. So many times throughout the Bible, God says, do not fear. Do not fear. Don't be afraid. Bringing comfort and stability and trust, right? And as dad, as we are freaking out, as life hits, somebody has to be the calming force in that situation to communicate, whether we say that part with words or not, that it's going to be okay. Dad's here. We're going to find our way through it. We're going to navigate this thing together. And that stability, I stabilize. That stability brings a security that a kid can thrive in and know, you know what, at the end of the day, I'm going to be all right. My dad is here, and here's the thing, they're learning when they see that, that's what God is like in my life. He doesn't leave, doesn't forsake, he doesn't quit. He's with me, upholding me, right, with his strength. Okay, here's the next one. We're stabilizing. Third, we're seeing. We're seeing our kids. This is a super hard one. It doesn't sound hard. It sounds simple, but it's not so simple. Here's the reason why. As a dad, there are so many things vying for your attention. I got bills to pay. I got oil to change. I got house projects. There's another house project. The water heater broke. Why is there a thing again? Now my boss wants me to do this. I got this, and we have these responsibilities. We have to go to the. Oh, and by the way, there's humans, right? There's humans, and they need. Here's what they need. They need me to look at them, and they need me to see them. They need me to see that they have hopes and dreams and stuff going on in there at all times. That's happening. And right, this is the strain of fatherhood, is I'm keeping all this going, and every once in a while, I got to make sure, I got to ask the question, am I seeing my kid in their uniqueness, in their gifting, in their pain, in their passion? And I want to make sure they know that their dad sees them and knows them. They're not just one of a clump of humans, that live under my roof. They're unique. They matter. Listen to what David says in the Psalms. This is so good. He says to God, keep me as the apple of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings. David, this warrior king, is fully aware that God sees him, that he has God's attention. He doesn't feel overlooked. He knows that God knows him. And when I think about being a dad, I want my kids to be able to say that. My dad knew me. He saw me. He heard me. Right? I want to see them. More than even the discipline, it's the knowledge of the human first. That person is seen and heard and known. Now, It can't just stop there. I've got to go from seeing, and sometimes I need to go to saying, We've got to actually go from seeing and noticing some things to actually verbalizing, saying it out loud, writing it down to them. A bunch of us grew up in households where love and appreciation and recognition wasn't communicated, right? The dads, we don't say things. You should just know, right? You should know I love you. I go to work. Well, that's cool. I mean, that's one way to do it, right? That's one plan. Here's the reality, and I think there's a genuine heart in all of that way. But the reality is, what your kids need from you is they need you to say it to them. Your small children need you to tell them that you love them. Your young men need you, fathers, they need you to tell them that you're proud of them, that they have your approval. They need to hear it from your voice. Your daughters need to hear from your mouth that they're beautiful and wonderful and worthy. And they have to hear it. And here's why. Look what Proverbs says. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Loaded statement. Here's the thing. Our kids, the people we influence, they're going to be surrounded with death, messages of death all the time. You're not enough, and you're not this, and you're not pretty enough, and you're not strong enough, and you're not fast enough, and you're not smart enough. You're not this enough, you're not that enough, and blah, 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 blah. And death and death and death and death. They have to have somewhere to go. Our sons and daughters have to have somewhere to go where they can hear life. And specifically, guys, hear this one. Specifically when it comes to their identity, who they are. They need to know when they fail that test, that's not who they are, that's what they did. When they blow it in life, that's not who they are, this is who they are. And they need life and truth spoken into them. And they need to know that there's somewhere to go. When I hear death from my friends and from my coach and from my teacher or from wherever I am, I need to know there's somewhere to go. And as a dad, we have a decision to make. Am I going to make home the place where I can go and hear life? When I go home, I hear life spoken into me. And I'm what God sees me as is repeated into my life. And that's a safe place because it's massive. All you have to do to see the value of this is think about the people in your life that spoke life into you. When somebody saw you and they recognized your value, and they didn't stop there, they actually verbalized it, they vocalized it, they said it to you. Whether it was mom or dad or an aunt or uncle or a coach, or probably if you go back, you can remember those moments when somebody invested and they actually said it. Huge deal here. This is what the Father does for us. He spoke to us. He communicated to us. He told us. He didn't hold back. He unloaded lavish love on us. That he wouldn't withhold anything from us. Not death or famine or nothing. That his love was unrelenting. And somehow we got to get that message through. That we love our kids that way. Here's the next one. Stewarding. We'll look at the verse. It says this, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh or to be selfish, right? Rather, serve one another humbly in love. As a parent, part of our role is to take the resources of the family, the finances, the opportunities, the gifts, and the abilities of our kids and help to manage those for the glory of God, to bring the best out of our kids. And that doesn't mean that we're trying to make them perfect or turn them into something that we want them to be instead of what God wants them to be. We're trying to raise them up and manage all of what we have for God's purposes. Our purpose as parents is not just to burn time. It's to help them to become people that serve one another humbly in love, as stewards of God's grace in their lives. Here's the next one. Sacrificing. This is a profound one here. As a dad, and in any leadership role, part of what is built into that is that we by nature are people that lay ourselves down. The Bible talks about the dad as the head of the family. And what that headship is representing, the parallel for it is like just like Jesus is the head of the church and he laid himself down for the church, we as dads are to take our leadership and we're to lay ourselves down for the betterment of our family. This is no small thing. It's worth mentioning. It's worth talking through. The reality of the fact that you have kids, or you have people in your life that you love, there's going to be a built-in set of sacrifices because of that. Think about how different your life might be if you were single. You're like, I do all the time, right? Honestly, think about how different your life would be if you were single. You're like, I would have this truck instead of that one. I would play softball every night instead of doing this. There's a set of decisions over here. And by the nature of making this decision, you're saying, I'm walking away from what could have been, and I'm embracing what is. That's real. And as we embrace that sacrifice, what we're saying is, God, I believe that this is a better way to spend my life. That at the end of the day, at the end of all of my days, when I look at Jesus face to face, when I face my deathbed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at these human beings that I invested into. And these human beings I'm going to look and say, these were worthy investments of my life, my passion, my energy. When the truck has rusted, there will still be, right, the humans that I invested into, the people, right? And guys, I realize there's no guarantees. There's no guarantees that the kids that we raise or the people we invest in are going to follow Jesus and that they're going to say yes. That's not how this thing works. God's the best parent of all, and he's got the most rebellious children. All we can do is do our part and trust God with the rest. This is what I'm asked to do. This is what God's calling me to do. And what I gave myself to was this. I want to sacrifice myself and lay myself down for the sake of the family. Ephesians 5 says this, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Here's the idea. Submission isn't just doing what somebody else wants. It's a bad and a poor man's definition. Submission is this. It's bringing all of my very best and bringing it to bear. I'm going to bring my passion and my creativity and my heart and my time and my money, and I'm going to bring it to bear for the sake of the people that I'm loving. That's the idea. Here's the final one. Shepherding. See, right, somebody's got to get above this thing. And if you're married, maybe you get to do it as a team and kind of look above the whole of where are we headed as a family? Where are we going? What's important? Are we aiming at something that matters? We're not just living in the weeks and in the days and in the months and in the years. We got to get above it some and say, where are we headed? Are we becoming what we want to become? Are we investing to what we want to invest into? Am I shepherding the family and helping it to navigate the way that God is calling me to? Here's God's heart again. Psalm 23, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. This is what God does for us. He shepherds us. And he says, hey, right, you're more tired than you realize. It's time to take a nap. You lay down. Right? I remember doing this if you have babies, you know how this works, right? There's like an explosion of babies here in our campus right now. There's just babies everywhere, right? So if you're in baby, some of you are like, yes, I have a baby. Woo. Right? When my kids were babies, they're not babies anymore. I remember my first son, he was a big baby, right? He's just like one of those big, huge babies. And he would get tired and he would fight it. You guys know how this works? Watch a little baby and they'll fight it and they'll squirm and they're not. And I would just kind of, you kind of cradle a baby. So I just kind of jam his like head in my armpit, face up, right? Not, come on, people, right? Face up, and I just kind of squeeze him, and he would fight it, and then he'd eventually pass out and take his nap, right? It was an awesome trick. It totally worked. It's like, you need to take a nap. You need to lie down, right? Now my kid's 6'4", he does it to me, right? It's like, Dad, take a nap. I'm like, okay. I don't want to take a nap, right? But this is like what God does with us. This is what we do with our family. Guys, we can't handle another one of those. Sometimes we have to say that. We're not up for doing that. We're gonna here, Dad. I'm gonna give you this. You're gonna have to be the one that says the word no. Use it for the sake of your family. No to this second or third thing to say yes to the first. To say yes to the best. Who does that work? The shepherd does that. Shepherding. We gotta fight for what's best. We're gonna make this. Can't do this one because this has to happen. We need time as a family, right? You guys are fighting to be here, being at church, being in the scriptures, fighting for developing who we are in Christ. I think these 7 words certainly aren't everything, but they're a good starting point. And let me just say this. Dads, I know you got to wonder, if you're like me, you wonder, man, am I doing it right? Is it working? God, am I being faithful? Listen, man, if you're in the ballpark, just thank you for staying the course. If you are a child of a dad that is doing this, man, you better give him a big hug today. Because your dad is a rare gem. And your dad is serving you and helping you in ways that you can't know. You can't even know. It's impossible to realize it. They're giving you a gift that is impossible to measure because it's just so normal. You have a dad that stayed and a dad that fought for you to know you. They did it imperfectly, of course. We all do. Thank him today. I realize that some of us are hearing this, and it's hard to not hear this as, I wish I would have had that list that you're describing. A bunch of us are in the room feeling that. Right? You're saying I didn't have anything like that. And listen, if that's you, I just want to recognize that there is a real grief. There's a real grief to that, to what could have been and what should have been. And if that's your story, it's worth taking a minute to see it and to grieve it. And then at some point, I got to forgive it. And here's the best I think we can do, is if there's anything whatsoever that I can take from that story, from my experience with my dad, if there's anything good, there's got to be something in there. Maybe there's a lot of good in there, but it feels tainted by the stuff that wasn't so good. Take the good, extract it, be grateful for it, build on it, on that foundation. And then somewhere in there, we got to make a conscious decision to say, I'm choosing to be the dad I wish I had. I think that's the best we can do. God, praise you for the good. I forgive for the bad. I grieve what should have been, what could have been. And now I'm going to give my kids the very best of my heart and my life and my mind. Somewhere in there's a deep love for our first neighbors, our kids. And when a family can start to have a culture like that, a normal, that's somewhere in the ballpark, never perfect, but somewhere in the ballpark of that, what happens is that family then begins to make an impact in the world that is exponential. It multiplies. Because these kids have received love, and now they can love as they have been loved. And this name starts to have an impact in our world. Right? That's the great dream, is that we can take what we've been given, invest it, and see it multiply forward in impacting our communities. Right? Here's our questions. Where am I taking my heart and my passion? Am I investing in the people in my life that God's called me to love? Whether that's my physical kids, it's my stepkids, maybe it's just people I'm mentoring. I was talking to a friend who's investing in foreign exchange students. There's a parenting to that. Whether they're people you've taken under your wing, whatever. Will I love as I have been loved and have it show up? Some version of this. And maybe most importantly, will you first know that you're loved like this? You're loved like this. Dad or no dad. Dysfunction or no dysfunction. You have a father who sees you and knows you and is trying to speak to you a love that you and I do not deserve. And he's never going to leave. Never going to forsake. He's going to make you lie down when you need a nap. He's going to refresh your soul. He's going to bring the best out of you. And he's already given all that he has. He gave you his son. This is the love that we get to live in. And then we imperfectly try to pass that love onto the people in our lives. As the band comes up, would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me as we sing and worship together? Lord, again, we just stand in awe of the amazing love that you have shown for us. God, it's just hard for us to even register it. Many of us. Because of our pain and our hurt and our disappointments. Lord, help us to know that there's a love that is perfect, that never fails and never leaves. Thank you, Lord, for forgiving us, for being for us, not against us. Thank you that there's an open invitation right now for each of us to come to you. And that no matter where we've been or what we've done, you're eager to receive us. And you've already paid for all that we've done through Christ. Lord, would you cause us to be blown away all over again as we stare at the height, and the depth, and the breadth of your great love for us. Meet us here, Lord, even now.